Good afternoon, everyone. Seeing as we're in Cardiff, I shall also say bore da, although that is the limit of my knowledge of Welsh. Is there a laser pointer on this thing?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Have to use old-fashioned gestures.
You can use a mouse.
Oh, lovely. That's even better. Great. Right. Yes, I'm going to be talking to you about phylogeny and macroevolution of the crocodylomorpha, which is basically the first 2 years of my PhD project. What we have here on the title slide is a rather charming creature called Laganosuchus, which has been nicknamed the pancake crocodile because it's got this really lovely flat, smooth snout. Rather charming creature. I thought it would be a good introduction. Before I begin, I've got a few thank you messages I'd like to hand out, most specifically to my supervisors, Mike Benton, Marco Andrade, and Gavin Thomas, for being very patient with me and for all their support. Thank you to Mario Bronzati, my co-author, who's been very generous with giving me some data. Thanks to Mark Patek and Tom Stubbs for teaching me some of the very complicated methods I've been using. And last but certainly by no means least, to the NERC for their money and their financial support, because it's very nice when you can get it. Alright, so why am I particularly interested in looking at the crocodylomorphs? The crocodylomorphs have a range of properties as a clade that make them uniquely suitable for this kind of study. They're extremely ancient, they're at least as old as the dinosaurs, but unlike the dinosaurs, and indeed unlike most of terrestrial vertebrate groups, they actually have a relatively good fossil record. Their bones are very massive, heavily reinforced. They've got thick, tough skulls and osteoderms which tend to preserve quite well. And of course, many of them live in water, so there's a very high probability that they'll be buried. So their fossil record is relatively good as terrestrial vertebrates go. Also, unlike the non-avian dinosaurs, at least, they have quite a large crown group. The crown group actually consists of about 2/3 of all crocodylomorph diversity. But rather strangely, their current diversity is somewhat limited, which I'll move on to in a moment. So the outcomes of my PhD is to come up with a comprehensive phylogenetic hypothesis for all the crocodylomorphs, and then to try and define what the tempo and mode of their evolution is, and try and tie this up with what the environmental and biological drivers might have been stimulating their evolution or restricting it. Well, so like I said, there's the extant diversity of crocodylomorphs is rather limited. It may look like quite a lot up there. There's 24 species altogether. We've got 6 gharials at the bottom left-hand corner, 2 alligators in the centre. This is a gharial over here, and all those ones at the top are all crocodiles. That might look a lot there, but if you compare that with the sister group of crocodylomorphs, which is the birds, which consists of 10,000 species, it's a bit of a dichotomy there. So why are the crocodiles so limited in their diversity, whereas the birds are so fantastically abundant? Another thing you might notice is, Tom was talking about disparity, but the disparity of the crocodiles is really rather low. And yes, we have little oddities like the gharial, which has got this modified snout for catching fish, but otherwise they're all kind of a bit the same, really, aren't they? They're all amphibious predators with long noses that live in water. They're a bit boring, really. But if you compare that with the fossil diversity of the crocodylomorphs, you get a rather different picture. So here we have some of the more photogenic examples of crocodylomorphs from the fossil record. We have Caprosuchus up in the top left-hand corner, the boar crocodile, as it was called, with tusks, this high-walking terrestrial carnivore. We've got flippered forms like this Geosaurus down here. Can you see that? Yeah. And also Dacosaurus up here. These are derived marine crocodylomorphs with fins adapted to a pelagic lifestyle in the open ocean. And we see these very odd, sort of a badger-like creature. This is Notosuchus over here. And they also get really ridiculously large. I mean, this guy, Sarcosuchus, is the largest crocodylomorph that's ever existed. 12 metres long, weighed multiple tons. So, crocodiles today don't get to anything like that size. So, for me to start trying to understand how crocodylomorph diversity, how crocodile evolution has progressed, I've got to try and put all this fantastic diversity into some kind of phylogenetic context. How exactly do I do that? Obviously, the first choice might be a molecular approach, but 95% of all crocodylomorph species are extinct, so that's not going to work. And a traditional morphological approach is suddenly looking very complicated because many of the specimens are vanishingly incomplete. I mean, what you see here in the bottom right-hand corner is the dentary of a crocodile called Microsuchus, which died out in the South Pacific about 5,000 years ago. It's quite recent. That's all we've got. That's it. It's just the tip of the dentary. And if you're trying to try and come up with a character profile of that with another crocodile which you only know from a toe bone, you're kind of a bit stuck. So the way around this that I've got around this is a kind of a compromise. It's a meta-analysis of phylogenies that have already been published. So this is, rather than coming up with a new phylogenetic analysis, I've produced a synopsis of the current consensus. This is achieved through the matrix representation parsimony method, the MRP method, which I'll just explain to try and make it a bit more transparent. So say, hypothetically speaking, you find a phylogeny in the literature which you want to try and deconstruct into a matrix of virtual characters. So, for example, in this particular case, we have a hypothetical paper, and we might encode a virtual character that is common to alligators and crocodiles, but absent in the other 4 taxa from the tree. And then you can go through each node on the tree doing the same thing, producing another virtual character to your MRP matrix. And go through the whole tree until eventually you can come up with something that you could actually run an analysis on. And through an exhaustive search of the literature, try and find out as many systematically produced trees you can come up with. You can stick them all together, and then you can run a parsimony analysis, and then you can produce your supertree. There's a caveat to this, because MRP trees, you can't actually generate a meaningful branch support value from them. Branch support values, you can go through the motions and do the maths, but what you end up with is actually a measure of research effort, not node support. There are some new Bayesian methods that have become available. Just this summer, that Davide Pisani published a paper on Bayesian supertree methods, but actually that paper was published after I had finished the supertree, so it sadly came too late for me. But this is it's a compromise, but it's a reasonable way of estimating the topology of the tree for the comparative phylogenetic work that I'm going to do. And here it is. This is the finished result, the supertree of the crocodylomorpha. With want of something to describe to you with, I'll just take on a quick tour of what we've got here. Down here we have the basal sphenasuchians, these little sort of cat-sized terrestrial carnivores. As we move up the tree over here, we have the terrestrial notosuchians. These are the really odd ones, herbivores like Cymosuchus, fossorial forms like Notosuchus, these little burrowing crocodiles. And then we move up, we have more derived terrestrial forms, the pterosaurs, which are over here. And then we move into the amphibious forms, the goniopholidids. And all these guys around here, these are all the eusuchians, the things that we would recognize as crocodiles today. Alligators, crocodiles, gharials, tomistoma, the false gharial. And then there's the true gharials, which are down here. And then finally, we've got this, this rather bizarre group of derived marine crocodylomorphs here. These are the thalattosuchians, things like Metriorhynchus and Geosaurus, and their near relatives, the phyloidosaurs, which are these guys over here. And just out of interest, I tip dated this using STRAP, which is an R package which uses first and last appearance dates to estimate how long the branches should be. Now, one of the first things I did with my tree was just to come up with a simple phylogenetic diversity curve, and this would include the ghost ranges of the tree. I've not looked at this in great detail, but I have already noticed something which strikes me particular interest, is that in the Cenozoic we see this curious pattern. Got a plateau after the KT, then it drops, and then we see another plateau around the end Eocene, and then it drops again to the current diversity of 24 species. And it shows what I think is a remarkable similarity to this temperature curve, which was published by Lear et al. In 2000. And actually, you can actually see the same pattern. You've got a plateau, a drop, another plateau, and then another drop. I haven't tested this yet. This is me being speculative, but I think this is further evidence that the diversity of the crocodylomorphs was very tightly controlled by environmental conditions. And actually, this corroborates some findings that have already been published. There's a long series of papers by Paul Markwick about the distribution of crocodiles with temperature. Last year, Jeremy Marsan published a paper on the subject, and then earlier this year, Phil Mannion and colleagues published a paper on the matter. So it all seems to be falling into place. There's definitely a relationship of sorts, whatever it is, between crocodylomorph diversity and global temperatures. Although I should add, I haven't tested this yet. That's what my next project is going to be about, so I'll tell you about that next year. So for the comparative phylogenetic work, I needed to come up with some continuous characters that I could use if we're looking at rates of evolution and the phylogenetic model of the supertree. I've used three. I've used body size. Body size, as Mark was saying earlier, is a fundamental character to many biological interactions, whether it's ecology or metabolism or all sorts of things. Body size is very important. But it's a little bit tricky when you're working with incomplete fossil data, because you can't, if you've only got a skull, you can't measure how long something is from the tip of the snout to the tip of the tail. So I had to come up with some kind of proxy for body size, and I ended up using skull width, because the skulls are the most commonly preserved element of a crocodile skeleton, and it's actually relatively conserved as a character. It doesn't vary much relative to body size. It seems to be fairly consistent. It's a predictor of body size. The other two continuous characters I used were principal component axes from geometric morphometrics of the skull. So these are just simple metrics of skull shape. Principal component 1 approximates roughly to the elongation of the snout, and principal component 2 is the breadth of the skull table. And these three characters together I use for phylogenetic modelling and trying to look at the tempo and mode of crocodylomorph evolution through time. One of the first experiments I did was looking at rate shifts in crocodylomorph evolution, and I took after one of Mark's papers, Patek et al. 2014. I followed the method. It's a very interesting paper. I highly recommend you read it. What I have here, I've tested all three different characters. I've summarised them on this phylogeny here. In the red, we have the crown crocodiles. That is just the crocodiles, not alligators and gharials, just the crocodiles, where we see a 10-fold rate shift increase in body size. The way the software works that out is by fitting a Brownian motion model to the tree, and then through hundreds of iterations, it changes the rate of evolution at a particular node. And then if the model fit improves, it then keeps that change and then keeps going through different iterations. And with this, if the model fit increase is statistically significant, it notes that as a rate shift increase. And here it's detected a 10-fold increase in the rate of body size evolution in extant crocodiles. Likewise, we see a somewhat smaller increase in body size evolution in the crown caimans as well, which is the ones marked in yellow at the bottom. The orange at the top is actually an increase in snout elongation. That is principal component 1 evolution in Phylogeny and Thalattosuchians, and that's sort of an intermediate value. The thing that surprised me is that because the crocodile diversity today is so low, you might have expected there to be a slowdown in evolution. But actually what we see here is the opposite is the case. The crocodylomorph evolution is actually going up. It's not that it makes it more difficult to justify them as so-called living fossils. Their evolution doesn't seem to be slowing down particularly. Yeah. So two of the models are fitted were the Pagel's kappa and Pagel's Pagel's lambda models. Pagel's kappa is a measure of what we call punctuated equilibrium. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this idea, whether evolution is gradualistic or sort of punctuated by bursts. And the body size and principal component 2, that is mostly, seems to be evolving along the lines of a punctuated model. That is something that seems to be incredibly stable, but it shifts periodically depending on something to do with the climate, or something triggers them to adapt to change. And Pagel's lambda shows a strong phylogenetic signal, which points towards sort of a very conservative model of evolution, that crocodiles don't really like evolving when they don't have to. It's very conserved. The exception is principal component 1. That is the snout elongation model, and that seems to be much more dynamic and much less predictable in how it proceeds. And actually, because that's strongly associated with feeding ecology, that's sort of what you'd expect, I think. I fitted some other phylogenetic models as well. I'm sure most of you will probably be familiar with these, but there's a number of different models like this. These are just some a schematic example of what's possible to test for. We've got an early burst model here, which sort of looks a bit like an adaptive radiation, where everything diversifies early on in their evolution. There's an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model, where the diversity sort of is constrained about an optimum phenotype. If you imagine a normal distribution, it would be about there. There's a directional trend model where everything shifts to one side, moves away towards a new phenotype. And there's a stasis model where everything is extremely stable and doesn't move around very much. I tested my, all three of my continuous characters on my phylogeny using those models. I'll take you very briefly through some of the more interesting results. For body size, you notice there's an awful lot of yellow on this. That's the stasis model. It seems to support the idea that crocodylomorphs were extremely stable, didn't evolve when they didn't have to. The Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model is this marked out in blue, so yeah, maybe there's some kind of constraining factor. I should point out that some of the data bins on this were quite small, sometimes 10 or 20 taxa, so might be necessary to take it with a pinch of salt. I've included them for completeness, but the crocodylomorphs, which is this column on the far left, and the Eusukins, they're well over 200 taxa each. I'm quite confident with those results. The ones that stand out as being particularly interesting are the Thalattosuchins, where we see this big red blob here, which is the early burst model. That supports previous research looking into adaptive radiations, which seems to support that, yes, there was an adaptive radiation in the Thalattosuchians. But it's not really there for the Notosuchians. The Trend and Ornstein-Uhlenbeck models represent the Notosuchians far better. So, yeah, the previous ideas about Notosuchians having undergone an adaptive radiation seems to be maybe a little bit questionable, whether it's more that there was sort of a more gradual shift in their evolution rather than an actual adaptive radiation. PC1, that is the snout elongation metric that I calculated using geometric morphometrics, is a much more difficult thing to get a grasp of. But I think that the abundance of the green, the Brownian motion model, I think supports what the Pagel's kappa and Pagel's lambda models have already shown, that the snout elongation evolution is much more closely related to feeding ecology rather than something that was phylogenetically predictable.
Can you wrap it up?
Oh yes, certainly. I shall quickly skip through. Yes, that'll do fine. Lovely. Well, yes. So I've now got like I said, I've got a comprehensive phylogenetic hypothesis of the evolution of the crocodylomorphs, and then the Thalattosuchians certainly seem to have undergone an increase in rates of evolution. The Notosuchians don't seem to have done, which is a bit of a surprise. Rates of evolution in the crown group don't seem to be slowing down that much, which is something of a surprise because we thought they'd be slowing down, being as limited in their diversity as they are today. Yes, I can see my time is running out, so thank you very much for listening. I'd be very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.